On the night before the world changed forever, a young physician named Sneha Philip stepped into a Manhattan department store and vanished from history. Hers is a mystery that lies in the long shadow of 9/11, entangled with tragedy, yet never fully explained. Sneha was 31 years old, an accomplished doctor living in Lower Manhattan with her husband, Ron Lieberman. Together they had built a promising life in the city, though it was not without its challenges. Sneha was known for her vibrant personality and her love of New York's social scene. Friends described her as passionate and adventurous, but also unpredictable. Her marriage, though deeply affectionate, had seen its share of strain, with disagreements about her habits and long nights away from home. Professionally, Sneha was also under pressure. She had recently lost a hospital residency and was seeking a new placement. Against this backdrop of personal tension, her final day unfolded. On September 10, 2001, Sneha was caught on security footage at Century 21, a department store located just across from the Twin Towers. She spent the afternoon shopping, purchasing lingerie, bed linens, makeup, and candles. These items were charged to her credit card, and she was last seen carrying the bags out of the store. What she did afterward remains a complete mystery. She never returned home that night. The following morning, September 11th, her husband left early for work. When the plane struck the World Trade Center, panic consumed the city. Ron rushed home through the chaos but found their apartment empty. With the smoke and sirens echoing through Lower Manhattan, he hoped, and perhaps believed, that Sneha had gone to the towers to help. After all, she was a doctor. Her instinct would have been to save lives. But days passed, then weeks, and there was no word from her. Her name never appeared on the official lists of victims. No trace of her body was recovered among the thousands lost in the attacks. This absence of evidence only deepened the mystery. Some investigators pointed to her complicated personal life as a possible factor. She and Ron had fought the night before she vanished, and Sneha was known to sometimes spend nights away with friends. Reports of struggles at work and her lifestyle choices were raised, leaving open the possibility that she may have met with foul play, or even chosen to disappear voluntarily. And yet, the proximity of her last confirmed movements to Ground Zero makes it impossible to separate her case from that day's devastation. Theories swirl even decades later. One view holds that Sneha was indeed a hero of September 11th, one of the countless unnamed victims who ran toward danger, not away from it. Others believe her life ended the night before, through abduction, assault, or worse. A third possibility, though more controversial, suggests she may have staged her own disappearance, leaving behind a troubled chapter to begin anew. None of these theories has ever been proven, and with the loss of so much evidence in the destruction of the towers, certainty may never be possible. Sneha's family fought for years to have her officially recognized as a victim of 9/11, and eventually, her name was added to the memorial. But even with that recognition, doubts persist. Was she truly among the thousands lost that day? Or did her story end in some other, darker way, lost beneath the weight of history? Whether Sneha Philip perished heroically on September 11th, or met a hidden fate the night before, her disappearance remains a haunting question, frozen forever in time. Where you are watching, comment, like, and subscribe for more. A hot Missouri summer, a lonely cornfield, and a man's body left behind with a riddle that still taunts the FBI to this day. This is the story of Ricky McCormick. Ricky was 41 years old, a man who had lived most of his life on the margins. He battled chronic health problems, had dropped out of school, and struggled to keep stable work. Those who knew him described him as a drifter, often caught between low-paying jobs and periods of unemployment. He lived near St. Louis, Missouri, and while he wasn't well known, his life would become infamous after his mysterious death. On June 30, 1999, Ricky's body was discovered in a field near St. Charles, Missouri. There were no clear signs of trauma, no weapon, and no witnesses. The cause of death could not be determined, but what shocked investigators were the items in his pockets. 2 handwritten notes filled with strange codes, jumbled letters, numbers, and symbols arranged in baffling sequences. At first, detectives believed the notes might hold the key to solving Ricky's death. The FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit was brought in, working for years to try to unlock their meaning. But the codes resisted every attempt. Even experienced codebreakers, including civilian cryptology enthusiasts who later took a crack at it when the FBI released the notes publicly in 2011, have failed to make sense of them. Adding to the mystery, Ricky's family insisted he could barely read or write, certainly not enough to create such elaborate ciphers. They believed the notes weren't his at all, but placed on him by someone else, someone tied to his death. Yet others pointed out that Ricky had a habit of scribbling odd notes to himself, suggesting the codes may have been his own personal shorthand. The FBI has never confirmed either way. Theories abound. Some speculate Ricky was involved in drug deals or criminal activity, and that the notes were instructions or records that someone wanted silenced. Others believe they were messages to himself, possibly linked to his struggles with mental health. The more sinister theory is that the killer left the codes as a taunt, knowing investigators would never solve them. To this day, no cause of death has been established, no suspect identified, and no motive proven. All that remains are 2 sheets of indecipherable code, a riddle buried with Ricky McCormick in a lonely field. The codes remain unsolved, leaving Ricky's death not just a murder, but a riddle from the grave. It began as a night of excitement, a simple trip to watch a basketball game. But for 5 friends from Yuba County, California, the journey ended in one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in American history, often compared to the Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia. The group became known as the Yuba County Five. They were young men between the ages of 24 and 32, each with mild intellectual disabilities or mental health conditions. Despite their challenges, they were close-knit, inseparable friends who shared a deep love for sports, especially basketball. On February 24, 1978, they piled into a car and drove to Chico, about 50 miles from home, to attend a college basketball game. The plan was simple: watch the game, then return home in time for their own Special Olympics basketball tournament the very next morning. But they never came back. Days later, their car was found abandoned in a remote, mountainous area, far off their intended route. Even stranger, the car was in working condition, with enough gas in the tank to continue driving. Yet there it sat, stuck on a snow-covered road, doors unlocked, and no trace of the men nearby. For months, the case baffled investigators and terrified the local community. Then, as the snow began to melt in June, searchers made a horrifying discovery. 4 of the men's bodies were eventually located in and around a remote trailer deep in the woods. Inside the trailer, they found the body of one man who had wasted away over weeks. The trailer itself had food, clothing, and fuel, supplies that could have kept the men alive for months. Yet almost none of it had been touched. Another body was discovered just outside, and 2 more were found along the road leading back toward the car, as if they had tried to walk for help. The 5th man, Gary Mathias, was never found at all. His fate remains a complete mystery. The circumstances defied explanation. Why had the group driven so far into the wilderness, away from their homes and the tournament they had been so excited about? Why leave the car when it was still operational? Why did the man in the trailer not use the supplies within arm's reach to survive? And what happened to Gary Mathias, whose disappearance continues to this day? Theories attempt to fill the gaps. Some suggest the men were misled or lured into the mountains, possibly by someone they met after the game. Others believe panic or confusion led them deeper into danger, with one decision spiraling into tragedy. There are even suggestions of foul play, though no solid evidence has ever surfaced. Decades later, the mystery of the Yuba County Five remains unsolved, their strange journey into the mountains still haunting those who study the case. To this day, one man is still missing, and the story of the Yuba County Five is remembered as America's own Dyatlov Pass. A lonely Texas highway, a broken-down truck, and a frantic 911 call that still chills anyone who hears it. This is the disappearance of Brandon Lawson. Brandon was 26 years old, a father of 4, and by most accounts, a man trying to steady his life. On the night of August 8, 2013, after an argument with his longtime girlfriend, he left home and set out on a late drive through rural Texas. Somewhere along Route 277, near Bronte, his truck ran out of gas. What happened in the next hour has kept his case alive in the minds of investigators and internet sleuths alike. At 12:50 a.m., Brandon made a 911 call. His words, slurred and panicked, have been played and replayed by countless listeners. "Yes, I'm in the middle of a field. I ran into them." He spoke of needing the police, of bleeding, of people chasing him. Dispatchers struggled to understand the chaotic message. Within minutes, sheriff's deputies arrived at the scene. They found his truck, unlocked, the gas tank empty. But Brandon was gone. Searches stretched across the rugged terrain around the highway, but the land was vast: scrub brush, fields, rivers, and mesquite trees. No clear sign of struggle was found near the truck, no footprints that led far enough to follow. His family insisted he wouldn't have just vanished. He had children, responsibilities, and he had called for help. The mystery only deepened when some suggested he might have been hallucinating, suffering from paranoia, or hiding from the law, as he had an outstanding warrant at the time. Theories split in every direction. One camp believes Brandon encountered foul play, perhaps ambushed after leaving his vehicle, with his 911 call being the last desperate attempt to survive. Others argue his call was clouded by fear and possible substance use, and that he simply fled into the brush, only to succumb to the elements. A darker, more haunting idea remains, that his cryptic words, "I ran into them," meant he truly did encounter something or someone that night, and whatever it was has never come forward. For nearly a decade, his disappearance remained unsolved. Then, in 2022, human remains were discovered in the area where he vanished, later confirmed to be Brandon's. Even with that discovery, the haunting question persists: what exactly happened to him that night? Brandon's words, "I ran into them," still echo, a mystery frozen in audio, leaving more questions than answers. In the spring of 1932, Stockholm awoke to a crime so grotesque that the newspapers gave it a name that has stuck for nearly a century: the Atlas Vampire Murder. The victim was 32-year-old Lily Lindestrom, a woman who lived in a small apartment in the city's Atlas district. She worked as a prostitute and was known by neighbors as quiet, reserved, and polite. She kept mostly to herself, except for her visits from regular clients. On May 7th, police were called to her apartment after friends reported they hadn't seen her in days. What they found inside was something out of a nightmare. Lily's body was discovered on her bed, face down, with evidence that she had been brutally bludgeoned. But it was what happened after her death that made the case infamous. Her body had been drained of blood. A blood-stained ladle, believed to have been used to drink from, was left behind at the scene. To investigators, it suggested ritual, obsession, or sadistic fantasy, something that seemed far beyond a crime of passion. The investigation unfolded quickly but with little success. Authorities interviewed her clients, checked alibis, and searched for anyone with a connection to Lily's final hours. But the evidence was sparse. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting she likely knew her killer and had let them in willingly. Whoever committed the crime seemed to vanish without a trace. The brutality of the act, combined with the vampiric element of blood draining, shocked the public and drew lurid headlines across Sweden. Theories about the case multiplied. Some believed it was the work of a sadistic client, someone whose fantasy had spiraled into murder. Others suggested occult or ritualistic motives, a killer with an obsession that had nothing to do with Lily herself. But with no solid suspects and little physical evidence, police were left empty-handed. To this day, the Atlas vampire has never been identified. The case remains one of Sweden's most haunting unsolved murders, a story of violence and ritual that feels less like history and more like a nightmare frozen in time. The so-called Atlas vampire disappeared into the night, leaving Sweden forever haunted. Where you are watching, comment, like, and subscribe for more. On a cold February evening in 2004, a young woman crashed her car on a quiet New Hampshire road, and within minutes, she was gone. To this day, the disappearance of Maura Murray remains one of America's most enduring mysteries. Maura was 21 years old, a nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. By all accounts, she was intelligent, athletic, and ambitious, but she was also carrying heavy burdens. In the weeks before her disappearance, Maura had faced personal struggles, academic pressures, relationship difficulties, and recent trouble with the law over a minor theft. To those who knew her, she seemed stressed but determined to push forward. No one could have predicted what was about to unfold. On February 9th, Maura emailed her professors claiming there had been a death in her family, a story that was not true, but one that gave her a reason to leave campus. She packed her car with clothing, toiletries, and textbooks, withdrew money from an ATM, and bought alcohol at a nearby liquor store. By late afternoon, she was driving north toward New Hampshire. It was a route she hadn't told her family or friends about. Sometime after 7 p.m., Maura's Saturn sedan crashed along a rural stretch of Route 112 near Haverhill. A passing bus driver stopped and offered help, but Maura declined, saying she had already called roadside assistance. That wasn't true. There was no record of any such call. Minutes later, when police arrived, the car was locked, airbags deployed, and the windshield cracked. Inside, they found a box of wine and beer, some of it spilled. But Maura was gone. The area was searched immediately. Dogs tracked her scent for only a few hundred feet before it disappeared, as if she had either entered another vehicle or vanished into the night. No footprints led away in the snow. Despite extensive searches, no physical trace of Maura was ever recovered. Not a body, not clothing, not belongings. It was as if she had stepped off the road and into thin air. The mystery has only grown with time. Some believe Maura planned her disappearance, perhaps fleeing to start a new life far from her troubles. Others suggest she was the victim of foul play, picked up by someone with sinister intentions. A third theory holds that she wandered into the woods and succumbed to the elements, her body hidden in the unforgiving terrain. The lack of evidence for any scenario has fueled endless speculation online, making Maura Murray one of the first missing person cases to become a true internet obsession. Years have passed, and her family still searches for answers. But every lead runs cold, and every theory seems to open more questions than it resolves. Maura's fate remains one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. In the spring of 1922, a small Bavarian farmstead became the scene of one of the most horrifying and perplexing mass murders in European history. To this day, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain a chilling legend, 6 lives brutally taken, and a killer who may have lived among the dead. The farm was home to Andreas Gruber, his wife Kazilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, her 2 young children, and their maid. They lived in isolation, surrounded by woods and fields. Life there was hard, and the family had their share of tension. Neighbors whispered about family disputes, and Victoria's relationships were a source of gossip. Still, nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold. Days before the murders, Andreas confided to neighbors that he had discovered strange footprints in the snow leading toward the farmhouse, but none leading away. He also reported hearing footsteps in the attic and finding a newspaper that no one in the family had purchased. The family dismissed it uneasily, but those details would take on haunting significance later. On the evening of March 31, 1922, someone lured the family members one by one into the barn, where they were slaughtered with a mattock, a heavy farming tool. The blows were brutal and deliberate. The maid and the children were killed inside the house. When neighbors grew concerned after days without seeing the family, they entered the farm and made the gruesome discovery. But what unsettled investigators most wasn't only the murders, it was what came after. Evidence suggested the killer stayed at the farm for days, feeding the livestock, eating meals in the kitchen, and living among the corpses. This chilling behavior led many to believe the murderer was someone familiar with the family, someone comfortable enough to linger in that house of death. Dozens of theories have emerged over the years. Some point to disgruntled neighbors or former lovers seeking revenge. Others believe it was a vagrant who stumbled onto the farm. A darker theory holds that the killer was someone within the family itself, hiding secrets that died with them. Despite one of the largest investigations in Bavarian history, no one was ever convicted. The Hinterkaifeck farm was eventually demolished, but the case has never faded from memory. The footprints in the snow, the killer's quiet stay after the murders, and the silence that followed make it one of the most haunting mysteries in true crime history. The Hinterkaifeck farm was torn down, but the mystery of who lived and killed inside still stands. On a quiet October afternoon in 1961, the peaceful suburb of Lincoln, Massachusetts, was shattered by a mystery that has never been solved. A devoted housewife named Joan Risch vanished from her home, leaving behind only bloodstains, overturned furniture, and questions that have haunted investigators for decades. Joan was 31 years old, married, and the mother of 2 young children. By all accounts, she led an ordinary life. She was well-educated, friendly, and deeply devoted to her family. Nothing in her background suggested she was the type of person who would simply walk away. Yet her disappearance would baffle police and turn her home into the center of one of New England's strangest unsolved cases. On October 24th, Joan spent the day at home with her daughter. Her husband was away on a business trip, and she seemed to be going about her normal routine. Sometime in the afternoon, neighbors noticed strange activity. One neighbor saw her outside in the driveway, apparently disoriented, holding something red that looked like blood. By evening, when Joan's husband returned home, he walked into a disturbing scene. Inside the house, furniture was overturned, and smears of blood streaked the walls and kitchen floor. The phone had been ripped from the wall, and yet Joan herself was nowhere to be found. Police quickly arrived, and what they found only deepened the puzzle. Though the blood in the house suggested an injury, there wasn't enough to indicate a fatal wound. And there were no footprints or trails leading far from the home. It looked staged, almost as if someone wanted it to appear like a violent struggle. As investigators dug into Joan's life, they uncovered something even more unsettling. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she had borrowed books from the library on missing persons, disappearances, and true crime stories. That discovery raised the question: had Joan staged her own vanishing, inspired by the stories she had read? Or was it just a strange coincidence? Theories about Joan's fate have never settled. Some believe she was the victim of a home invasion or abduction, her disappearance the result of foul play by someone who knew her. Others believe she deliberately staged the scene, fleeing her suburban life for reasons still unknown. A smaller camp has suggested she may have suffered an accident, perhaps a head injury, that caused her to wander away in confusion, though no evidence has ever supported that. More than 60 years later, not a trace of Joan Risch has ever been found. No body, no belongings, no sightings. Just an empty home, blood on the walls, and the unsettling possibility that her disappearance was planned from the very start. Whether Joan was killed, abducted, or the architect of her own vanishing act remains an unsolved enigma. Where you are watching, comment, like, and subscribe for more. In early 2013, a young woman's final moments inside a Los Angeles hotel were captured on security footage that would go on to haunt millions. What happened to Elisa Lam remains one of the most disturbing modern mysteries in true crime. Elisa was 21 years old, a Canadian student traveling alone through California. She checked into the historic Cecil Hotel, a building infamous for its long, dark history of suicides, crime, and tragedy. Elisa kept in touch with her family during her travels, calling regularly. But in late January, her calls stopped. On January 31st, she was reported missing. For days, police searched the hotel and surrounding area, but there was no sign of her. Then, investigators released surveillance footage from one of the hotel's elevators. The video showed Elisa behaving strangely. She pressed multiple buttons at once, stepped in and out of the elevator repeatedly, made unusual hand gestures, and appeared to be speaking to someone unseen in the hallway. The footage went viral, sparking worldwide fascination and fear. Weeks later, on February 19th, hotel guests began complaining of low water pressure and odd-tasting tap water. Maintenance workers inspected the rooftop water tanks and made a gruesome discovery. Elisa's body was floating inside one of the tanks. How she got there remains unclear to this day. The mysteries surrounding her death only deepened. The hotel's roof was normally locked, with alarms set to alert staff if anyone accessed it. The water tanks were heavy, with lids difficult to open, and yet Elisa somehow ended up inside. The official autopsy ruled her death an accidental drowning, citing her struggle with bipolar disorder as a possible factor. But many questions remained unanswered. If she had gone to the roof alone, how had she bypassed the security? Why did her behavior in the elevator seem so disturbed, almost terrified? And if her death was accidental, why does so much about it feel unresolved? Theories have run wild. Some believe she suffered a severe mental health episode that tragically led her to the rooftop. Others are convinced foul play was involved, pointing to the hotel's dangerous history and unsafe environment. More sensational theories have even suggested paranormal forces at work, fueled by the Cecil Hotel's reputation as a magnet for tragedy. The case continues to stir debate even now. Despite official findings, Elisa Lam's final days, her bizarre elevator footage, and her inexplicable presence in the water tank leave behind a story as haunting as it is tragic. Elisa Lam's haunting elevator footage still sparks debate about what really happened that night. On a cold February day in 1957, a small cardboard box was discovered in the brush along a rural road in Philadelphia. Inside was the body of a little boy, badly beaten, wrapped in a blanket, and left discarded as if his life meant nothing. The case would come to be known simply as the boy in the box, and for decades, it stood as one of America's most haunting child mysteries. The boy was believed to be between 3 and 7 years old. He was malnourished, scarred by signs of abuse, and his hair had been crudely cut after death, as though someone had tried to disguise him. Detectives described the scene as heartbreaking and bizarre. There were no fingerprints on the box, no labels to trace, no missing child reports that matched his description. For investigators, it was as though this boy had never officially existed. The community was horrified. Police plastered thousands of flyers with the boy's image across Philadelphia and beyond. They even displayed his photograph on gas bills sent to residents, hoping someone might recognize him. But lead after lead fell apart. Tips went nowhere, and the boy's identity remained stubbornly out of reach. Over the years, he was buried in a local cemetery, marked only as America's unknown child. Theories grew around the silence. Some believed he was the victim of an illegal adoption gone wrong. Others suggested he had been abandoned by his biological parents or killed by foster caretakers. A few thought he might have been trafficked, his identity erased long before his body was found. Every new investigator who took up the case seemed determined to solve it, but the answers never came. It wasn't until 2022, 65 years later, that investigators finally gave the boy a name: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Through modern DNA testing and genealogical research, his surviving relatives were identified. But even with his identity restored, the most vital question remained unanswered: who killed him and why? For decades, Joseph was known only as the boy in the box, a nameless child whose short life ended in unimaginable cruelty. Now, at least, he is no longer unknown. But the truth about what happened to him may still lie buried with the past. Even with a name finally restored, the boy in the box remains one of America's most chilling unsolved murders. Where you are watching, comment, like, and subscribe for more.